Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be concentrating on the poem Climbing My Grandfather by Andrew Waterhouse. Waterhouse was an environmentalist, a writer and a musician who won the Forward Poetry Prize for his collection entitled In during 2000. Now Waterhouse suffered from depression and tragically died by committing suicide in 2001. His fellow poet and friend, Linda Francis, stated that there are lots of confined spaces in his work, suggesting that there are hints at darkness and tragedy that are mentioned in his work. In his obituary, published in The Guardian, another poet, Sean O'Brien, commented that Waterhouse's poetry was full of solid objects and hard edges, once more highlighting this sense of grit and unrelenting suffering in the midst of his poetry. So let's take the title, Climbing My Grandfather. This poem faces us with, as readers, this extended metaphor, where the speaker presents the grandfather as a mountain or cliff face that must be summited. We understand the freedom of an upward summit and the climbing in the open spaces, but we also know that that is arduous and difficult. As we unearth this poem, the discovery of the grandfather is tender and it heightens our admiration for who they were and also who our speaker is. Just like we call some people our rock for being stable, the grandfather seems to have this same presence, even potentially after death for the speaker. And it's as if our poet is climbing out of their own mental anguish. I decide to do it free, without a rope or net. First the old brogue's dusty and cracked, an easy scramble onto his trousers, pushing into the weave, trying to get a grip. By the overhanging shirt I change direction, traverse along his belt to an earth-stained hand. The nails are splintered, and give good purchase. The skin of his finger is smooth and thick like warm ice. On his arm I discover the glassy ridge of a scar, place my feet gently in the old stitches and move on. At his still, firm shoulder I rest for a while in the shade, not looking down, for climbing has its dangers, then pull myself up the loose skin of his neck, to a smiling mouth to drink among teeth. Refreshed, I cross the screed cheek to stare into his brown eyes, watch a pupil slowly open and close, then up over the forehead, the wrinkles well spaced and easy, to his thick hair soft and white at this altitude, reaching for the summit, where gasping for breath I can only lie, watching clouds and birds circle, feeling his heat, knowing the slow pulse of his good heart. The first thing that strikes us is that if climbing his grandfather is so positive, why does our speaker always hint at it as so dangerous? The first person, I decide to do it free without a rope or net, sounds dangerous. But more than anything, as we move through the middle of this poem, we're identifying that climbing has its dangers. So perhaps the most obvious danger is this sense of revisiting feelings of loss and grief that are painful after years, maybe without their grandfather. Another suggestion might be that writing about someone you love is dangerous. You wonder what they'd think of your writing, and if they're no longer with you, you worry if you're somehow downgrading them with your sentiment. But the most obvious is that, well, the danger of climbing is you could fall. And in line 4, we understand that this speaker is trying to get a grip and trying to get a hold on their grandfather because they don't want to fall. As we move through this block of poetry that graphologically looks like a mountain, we hit the line that describes his finger, smooth and thick like warm ice. And that's a paradoxical, almost oxymoronic image. I'm not used to seeing warm ice. It rarely stays warm for long because it melts. It's as if this memory might be melting. But also the image of this glassy ridge of a scar. That's a slippery cold surface. And as readers, we're questioning what's happened to this grandfather to get him this scar in life? What's happened in his life to give him this rugged look? It's interesting that our poet has chosen to simultaneously immortalise his grandfather in this poem, but also to dehumanise him by taking away human features and instead make it more like a mountain. We're just struck by how great the grandfather is in terms of size and enormity. And in comparison, our speaker is tiny. And we have to question, is the speaker meant to be pathetic in comparison to the epicness, the greatness of their grandfather? Another thing to note is that there is an absolute lack of rhyme and lack of connection between the words and their message in sonic terms. That's the sounds that are created, which highlights that for the speaker anyway, harmony is missing, maybe in their life, but in their sentiment anyway. As I mentioned earlier, the graphology of the poem makes it seem like we are viewing the side of a mountain with its hard edges and crevices that need to be battled and held onto. And more than anything, our troubled speaker is seeking to climb this mountain of their grandfather to unearth qualities that might bring them joy and help them as a speaker manage their life. By focusing on this semantic field of ageing or physical appearance, we want to, as readers, work out what were the experiences and scars of this grandfather's life. Reaching the summit is the top of the grandfather. In this case, their hair is white, like the top of a mountain might be white. And when our speaker takes in this view, there's this absolute sense of intimacy between the speaker and their grandfather. And in that moment, there is peace. They're gasping for breath. And all they can do is lie. Exhausted, our speakers watching nature, and nature that we associate with freedom, be that the birds and the clouds up above as they circle. As we move towards the end of this poem, we're aware that there are two types of freedom. There's the freedom of the physical, feeling the heat of his grandfather, and also the mental freedom of knowing the slow pulse of his good heart. That final phrase of good heart highlights this emotional bond, that physical and emotional connection that can never be broken, even if the grandfather is no longer with him. And then finally, I suppose the point that we have to take away from this poem is that it is full of nuance. Our poet or speaker is seeking to hold on to moments that life can throw at them. And this huge figure of the grandfather presents security. So I suppose the overarching theme for us to take away from this poem is not just familial love and the love for those that have helped raise you, but also how their memories can continue to galvanise you and push you forward. Perhaps the question that Waterhouse is leaving with us as readers is, what sets us free? What are the things that fire us up? And what are the people that look down on us now, maybe from heaven, thinking of how we live our life? Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?